Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Did Maslow Get It Wrong? My name is Michelle MacArthur from Jigsaw at Work. As we all know, today's working environment, organisations are demanding more and more from us all the time. And in actual fact, it's said that there's actually an estimated 20% increase in performance required within our organisations. And to put that into context, over the last 10 years, we have seen just a 10% increase. If we were to continue as we are doing at the moment, at best we can hope to see a 3 to 5% increase in performance over the next few years. If we just look at the way that we actually are managing our people these days in organisations, some of the practices date back as far as the 1930s. We've still got the carrot and stick approach that is being used in some places, which goes back to Pavlov and his dog back in the 1930s. We've got some of the approaches from the 1950s and 60s, the behaviourism, Carl Rogers and Abraham Maslow, who we'll touch on a little bit later. Now, in theory, they should be quite effective solutions. However, we just don't have the time these days to really help and support our people. And if we just take something as simple as the good old PDR, for example, then it's something that managers don't really enjoy doing, they don't want to do. It's something that it's an added job we've got to do. We've been told we have to do it. Actually, our employees don't enjoy it. And all we're doing is really causing quite a stressful situation for both managers and the actual employees themselves. And neuroscience has shown us that this actually creates what we call a threat response within people and has a negative impact. And there's lots of research being done about this, and there was some research done fairly recently actually, and they took a group of HR managers and they asked them to give, group one had to give their staff some really, really negative feedback, but they had to deliver it in a very positive way. And the second group had to deliver some really positive feedback, but in a very negative kind of way. The group who received the negative feedback, but in a very positive way, actually were far more motivated at the end of it than the group who got the good feedback, but delivered in a negative way. And that's all to do with this kind of threat response. And even when we try and be quite polite about things, if we kind of think about it, and we ask people quite politely about what made you think that idea would work, we still pick up on that, our brains still read that as actually that's a negative threat to us. And so we'll respond in a very negative way. So what we need to do is seriously think about changing our working practices. Unfortunately, the way that we are working, because of the pressures in our organisations, we are able, for a short term, in the short term, to actually manage the demands on us, the workloads on us. However, in the longer term, we're not going to be able to continue to do that. And we're already starting to see some of the kind of human cost of that. If we think about it, we've got an increase in what we call presenteeism. And that's where people are actually present at work. In body, they're there, but in mind. And it is actually said again, in neuroscience has shown that up to 49% of the time that we spend at work, our mind is not on the task that we're actually doing. We have what's called the wandering mind. We've got mental health issues which are on the increase. 1 in 4 of us suffer from some form of mental illness. Now, just looking around here, that's quite a few of us looking around here. Stress-related illness was increased last year by 18%. These are all signs that we're starting to see that the demands that we're putting on people these days are not sustainable. We have to change something because we do still need that level of performance, but we need to think about how we're actually going to achieve it. Over the years, we've been taught that the size of the human brain actually increased quite dramatically to help us with that abstract reasoning type of thinking. to help us solve those basic kind of problems that will challenges, problems that we have in life, to help us deal with all that complex information. However, increasing evidence now suggests that perhaps that's not quite the case. That in fact, our brains actually grew and developed to help us do more social thinking. The ability to get along better and connect better, have better relationships with one another. In the past, it was often thought that the smartest people were those people who had the highest IQ, that were intellectual. But is that true? Actually, maybe it could be the people that have the greatest social intelligence. Whereas in actual fact, what we are finding, those forward-thinking organisations now have recognised that yes, obviously we do still need a certain level of IQ. But what is missing in many cases is the social competencies, the social intelligence. And so forward-thinking organisations are now looking to recruit or develop those social intelligences, those social competencies within their organisation. The human brain uses 20% of the total energy that we consume. In actual fact, prenatal and in babies, that's up to 60%. Now that's a very high degree of energy. And why is that important? Well, the only reason that the brain through evolution would have grown so large when it uses so much energy is if it was vital to our reproduction and survival. According to scientists, there's 3 hypotheses. There's what we call the individual innovation. That's our problem solving. So one hypothesis is yes, the brain did grow to help us to do more problem solving, more of that cognitive thinking. The second hypothesis is it's actually to help us with what we call social learning, because we have acknowledged now that not everybody can be great innovators. Some of us are just very good at imitating what other people do, at doing the following. And the third hypothesis is all about what we call group size. The ability to be able to connect and cooperate with one another. So just think, ask yourself the question, could you be totally self-sufficient? Could you build your own home, generate your own electricity, your own food? Yeah, we wouldn't have this level, this quality of life that we have if we had to be totally self-sufficient. We need actually other people. It's that connections that's important. And a gentleman is an anthropologist, Robin Dunbar, back in the 1990s, claimed that the reason that the neocortex part of the brain actually grew so large was because of this social element. There's something called the size of the neocortex, the ratio, the size of the neocortex relative to the overall size of the brain. And Robin Dunbar, quite controversially actually, said that it's that ratio that indicates the size of the group that we can connect with. And based on the various equations that Robin Dunbar did, he said that in human beings we can actually, our brains have the capacity to work with, connect, belong to groups of up to 150 people. And through history's actually borne that out. From as early as the 6000 BCs through to the 1700s, the average size village was about 150 people. Both in ancient and modern military units are about 150 people. So mammals, human beings, we can't exist on our own. We need social connection. If I could just ask you, just for a moment, just to think about 2 painful experiences that you have had in your life. I'm not going to ask you to share them or anything, but just think about 2 painful experiences that you've actually had. My guess is that at least one of them involves something that we would call social pain. Perhaps the loss of a loved one, some form of public humiliation, being dumped by your boyfriend or girlfriend even. These are all causing threats to our social side of life. These are actually could cause damage to our social bonds, to our relationship. They're producing some sort of threat to our social life. And that's creating a pain, social pain. And social pain we feel just like we would if you hit your thumb with a hammer. It's a very real pain. And there's actually a piece of the brain, the yellow bit that it's shown up there, and that's the anterior cingulate cortex, and the insula is also involved in this. And if you like, that acts as an alarm system, and it becomes very active when there is an unexpected occurrence, when there is some form of discrepancy between what we expect or want and need and the actual life situation. And two of the researchers that have done a lot of work in this is Matthew Lieberman and his partner Eisenberger, and they have looked at those links between social and physical pain, and they published their work back in 2012 that actually said yes, it's the same parts of the brain that actually become active when we feel a social pain as we do a physical pain. And back in 2008, there was another researcher, DeWall, did an experiment where he took two groups of people. And one group of people, he gave them for 21 days a placebo pill. The other group, he gave them an ordinary, everyday painkiller. And what he what he asked them to do was to just monitor and record how much social hurting feelings they actually experienced each day. So they had to record how often they felt hurt during the course of the day. And by day 15, the group who were taking the painkillers actually experienced less feelings of hurt. Now, we're not yet at that stage of saying that we can take an Anadin and it'll cure that, when we've got a heartache and we've fallen out with somebody. We're not quite at that stage. But it was interesting just to see that even with social pain, it can be impacted by just the everyday kind of painkiller. So, a question to you. I'm just going to give you just literally a minute or two just to kind of maybe talk in your own small groups about this. As human beings, what do we actually need to survive? So I'll just give you a minute, just a quick kind of minute in your group. What do we actually need to survive as human beings? Okay, if we can kind of stop there then. So, anybody got any ideas what kind of things came out in that discussion? What do you actually need to survive? Air and food. Yeah, anybody else? Water? Yeah, it's all those basic kind of things. And if we take a look at kind of the traditional Maslow's hierarchy, he says it's those physiological things, then our safety. Those are the basic things that we need. But let's just think for a moment. Many of us have got young children. As an infant, if our basic need is for food and water, those physiological and safety kind of needs, as an infant, can I actually survive on my own? I need a caregiver as an infant. I need other people. So the question is, did Maslow get it wrong? Should the hierarchy look more like that? Where we bring the social down to the bottom of the pyramid. Because we can't survive on our own. We do need other people. Our whole biology is to connect with other people. And when we have some form of social pain, the memory of that social pain is far stronger, far more intense than a physical pain. The other point I'd just make out, if anybody's still not quite sure about actually does social pain really exist, I'd ask you to think about why, if it doesn't exist, why then, universally, do we use the language of physical pain to describe unpleasant social events? So we hear people saying, she broke my heart. He hurt my feelings. It was like being punched in the stomach. So we actually use that language. If you're still not sure about it, think about the effects of being socially excluded. All the time in the news we hear about the elderly being excluded, different groups of people being excluded from society and the impact that it's actually having. Think about the distress of a young child being separated from its parent. So, did Maslow actually get it wrong? I'll let you think about that one. Well, maybe social is a little bit more important than we thought. On the basis that social is quite important then, that it is that very basic need, that it needs to be at the bottom of the pyramid, whenever, as I mentioned earlier, whenever there is any threat or perceived potential threat to our social connections, that's going to create a threat response within our bodies. Our fight or flight is going to kick in. And again, there was some research done by a gentleman called Lasada into the ratio of positive to negative messages and the positive to negative environment, the ratio of positives within our environment. And he actually did some studies on teams and looking at how many positive messages were given out in a team compared to the negative messages. And he equated that then into performance. And he came out that positive to negatives need to be, for a performance to impact positively, we must have a minimum of 3 or more positives to every one negative in our environment. Now just think about within your own organisations, the messages and things that are being given out in your own organisation. Again, I'm not asking you to sit here and count, but is it more negative messages that are coming across, or is it more positive messages that come across? And there's actually a graph that he produced where we can see the flourishing and peak performing teams have at least 3 or more positives to the negatives. If we turn that around and we get 2 or more negatives to every one positive, that can actually lead to depression and the team having that real disengagement. So think about the positive to negatives. Working is a fact of life for most of us, for most adults. We spend an awful lot of time at work. It's how we fund our lifestyles. Yet most organisations don't actually get the social bit right. For most people, going to work doesn't feel like being part of a family. A lot of people that I speak to when I come into contact with, work for them is not a particularly positive, rewarding experience. It's more a means to an end for many people. And this is becoming even more important at the moment, where we're finding that within society, never before has so many people lived on their own. That social contact all around is actually breaking down. Think about the introduction of technology. And we no longer, again, we don't work with people as much. There's virtual ways of meeting these days, which is better than nothing, but it still is not the same as that real face-to-face connection that we need. So creating the right social environment in our place of work really needs to be a priority, because if it's not right, we're creating a threat, a potential threat. And that's then going to trigger a threat response, our fight or flight, stress, and leading on to eventually some form of depression. We're reaching that kind of burnout. Dr. David Rock from the Neuro Leadership Institute, many of you may be aware of, he has actually spent the last 10 years trying to persuade people that social actually really does matter in the workplace. And he developed back in 2008, he published a model that is known as the SCARF model. Now again, many of you may well have come across this, and it looks at the 5 domains, and this was originally done around motivation. But he says these are the 5, David would say these are the 5 social domains, but I'm going to concentrate just on 3 of those domains today, which are most definitely social. The first one being status. I'm actually working with a public sector organisation at the moment. They've gone through massive restructuring, and several people have been downgraded. Now the reality of that means that they've lost their prestigious job title. They're still on the same pay structure. The pay structure has been guaranteed for the next 2 years. But how do you think those people actually feel? There is total demotivation, unrest amongst them, because this is a massive status threat. I worked with another organisation, a sales organisation, and every week they produced a global league table. Monday morning, the global league table came out at around about 10 o'clock. And when you went into the office on a Monday morning, everybody was there, and they couldn't wait till that league table came out and was put upon the wall. It made no difference to them from a week-to-week perspective as to where exactly people were on that league table. But if they'd gone up, boy oh boy. But if they'd gone down, whoa. It made a massive difference, because this is a status, either threat or reward, depending on whether they'd gone up or down. So it's not always about the big things though. How do you respond when your manager comes to you and says, "Can I have a word?" What's the first kind of thing that goes through your mind? Sorry? Fear. For most of us, it's, what have I done now? What's wrong? And there's all those colleagues probably, because we work in open plan offices these days, sitting around us thinking, they're in trouble. A massive impact, a massive status threat. But it's something as simple as that. So we really do need to think about what we are actually doing and saying. Every action is important. Think next about, the next one on here is relatedness that I just want to touch on. The degree to which people feel connected. I was working for another organisation, and there's something called the in-group and the out-group. And one of the senior managers from the organisation came to me and said, "I want you to have a look at a team for me. There's a bit of a problem." I said, "Okay." So I went along and I worked with the team. The team was about 12, I think there was 12 in total in the team. 11 men, 1 female. On top of that, the female was about 20. She was in her early 20s. The average age of the team was kind of mid-30s into 40s. She was very much an introvert. The team were mostly extroverts. She needed quite a structured working environment. They were quite a laid-back kind of team. Certainly structure wasn't a word I would use to describe the collective of the team. And people couldn't understand why she didn't fit in. It was because, quite simply, she was put into the out group. She's not like us. And the play of the in-group and out-group comes into the workplace an awful lot. As a manager, are they in the in-group with their team, or are they in the out-group? The senior team, they're most definitely in the out-group if we're one of the team members. Because it's all about producing similarities. So we need to think about how we can create those similarities between ourselves and our colleagues, so that we're all perceived as being in that in-group. Because people who don't fully integrate into a team often struggle. And just think about it. If you need some help on a task, are you going to get the help the quickest from a stranger or from somebody who you actually know, a friend? The last scarf domain I want you to look at is fairness. And fairness, the perception of fairness, it's not based on cold, rational kind of thinking. It's done on emotional judgment. So how fair is your organisation? How fair are you as leaders of other people? That's not your judgment, by the way. That's the other people's judgment of that. Perceptions of unfairness in the workplace can affect physical and mental health, according to Robbins, Ford and Terrick. So it's having all the time, it's affecting our mental health, which then goes on obviously to impact on our productivity and our performance. So how does SCARF impact? Well, first of all, the SCARF model, and using the SCARF model, it can produce an easy, clear language for people to remember. If we think about status, how is whatever action I'm about to do or take, how is that going to impact on this person's status or on the status of the team? It also enables us to predict situations. If I do this, how will this impact on the status of people, the relatedness of people? So when we introduce open plan working, for example, what's this actually doing for our status? How is this affecting the relatedness? How is this going to impact on fairness? Is it going to have positive or negative impact? It can help us during a situation. So when we're going through a major piece of change, it can help us to think about the threats as they're occurring and to start to explain why certain things are occurring, why certain people are displaying behaviours that they do. Afterwards, it can be used to explain the situation, and hopefully we can go on and learn from it for the future. So, why is it getting it right so hard? Simply because some people do have a predisposition to non-social thinking. Some people don't prioritise non-social thinking. And the impact of that, I'm sure at some time or other, we've all worked with somebody, had a team member who experiences a problem in completing a task. The non-social thinking person, their response to that would be, perhaps there's a training need here. Perhaps they need the skills training. A social thinking person would actually read the subtext, and they'd be able to tell if it wasn't particularly a skills problem, actually this could be more a problem regarding relationships and working with other people. So again, it's really important that we recognise that both types, the most effective managers use both social and non-social thinking. Socially competent people then, they understand and care about social motivation, they foster better relations, have better communication, they nip social issues in the bud because they can identify them so much earlier. And they are aware how best to serve the team rather than thinking purely about themselves and serving themselves. And that actually brings me to the end of the presentation. If anybody has got any questions, then I'm quite happy to step off out of the arena so the next people can set up and answer the questions, or do drop by on stand 422 and I'm more than happy to chat. If you want a copy, this is being videoed, if you want a copy, then hopefully we've scanned most people, but if anybody hasn't been scanned, if you either see my colleague at the back in the red t-shirt, or again drop by on stand 422, we're more than happy to send out a copy of the video. So thank you very much for listening.